Hey everyone, did you know that February the 5th was National Nutella Day? Hey everyone, today I made myself a Nutella sandwich, which I did for a couple reasons. First of all, because Nutella is awesome, and secondly, because I wanted to talk about Mark. And you might wonder, what does Mark have to do with Nutella? And the answer is nothing. But if you wonder what Mark has to do with sandwiches, the answer is, well, I'm going to tell you. I don't know what kind of sandwiches he ate. I don't know what sandwiches were like in the first century, but I do know how he wrote. And one of the techniques that Mark uses a lot is writing in sandwiches. And this is what I mean by that. I mean, he writes about something, and then he writes about something else, and then he comes back to writing about the first thing. So like two pieces of bread with a piece of something, whatever it may be, in the middle. The easiest place to see this is in Mark chapter 5, which we're actually going to talk about this Sunday. But in the story, in Mark chapter 5, Jesus is encountered by a guy named Jairus who says, "My daughter is sick." And Jesus starts to travel to Jairus' house. And while he is on the journey, he is touched by the woman who comes and touches his cloak. And he says, "Who touched me?" And then he has this conversation with this woman. And then we go back to Jairus as Jesus goes to his house. And so it's so easy to see how Mark just sticks this story of this woman right in between the story of Jairus. But Mark does this all over the place. Jesus curses the fig tree, and then he goes into the temple and turns the tables, and then he returns to the fig tree. The religious leaders are plotting against Jesus, and then the woman anoints Jesus, and then we come back to Judas and the plotting. Mark's sandwiches are all over the place, and they're designed either to complement or to contrast. The middle piece of the sandwich is designed to complement or contrast the outside pieces. But either way, it always exists to illuminate it. These sandwiches are meant to be read and taken together and interpreted together, much like my Nutella sandwich is made to be eaten all at once, and I really shouldn't just get a spoon and eat Nutella out of the jar like I want to, right? It's meant to be eaten together. So Mark's gospel is full of these sandwiches, and I encourage you to spend time looking for them, because if you look for them, you will find them. I promise you. Also, I personally think the entire book of Mark is like one grand sandwich about the identity of Jesus. And it's the identity of Jesus on either end, and sandwiched in between are all these things he did that reinforce and illuminate who he is. That's what I think Mark's gospel is. Also, Mark has another technique, and that is he just loves the number 3. Right? We all know that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. But what about the 3 times that Jesus told his disciples to wake up? What about the 3 times that Jesus predicts his death? The 3 times that Jesus is on the boat with the disciples? Mark does this all the time. So, and those usually are become increasingly emphasized or increasingly intense. They're part of Mark's way of pushing us into the narrative and building it up as he goes along. Really neat. Okay, so we talked about the Markan sandwich. We've talked about Mark's use of 3s. There's one other thing I want to talk about. So I want to talk a little bit about a missing gospel, or a hypothetical gospel, if you will. We have our 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John is very much kind of its own thing. It reads a little different than the other 3, but the other 3 all have shared qualities, or stories that are very similar to one another, either identical or just subtly changed. And so the question that scholars have asked for centuries is, what is the relationship between Mark and Matthew, Mark, and Luke? And the hypothesis that has gained the most traction among scholars for a very long time goes like this. It says that Mark wrote his gospel. See, Mark's gospel, by the way, is almost entirely contained within Matthew and Luke's gospel. So between those 2 gospels, almost all of Mark is repeated somewhere. So the idea is that Mark, who wrote about what Jesus did more than what Jesus said, wrote his gospel first. He is the earliest gospel writer. And then the theory goes that there was another document that was written that had a lot of sayings by Jesus. And maybe it's a few documents, maybe it's a collection of oral stories about Jesus, but either way, we have this hypothetical document or gospel. So we have Mark's gospel that came early, and this hypothetical gospel, which has been called Q. Q comes from a German word that means source, but it's just called Q. And so we have Mark and we have Q. And then the idea goes that Luke and Matthew had access to both of these books when they wrote their own books, because Matthew and Luke both have shared stories that come directly from Mark's gospel, and they have shared stories and sayings that are not in Mark's gospel, so they must have come from somewhere else. So the idea is they came from Q. A prime example is the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer is not found in Mark, but it is found in Matthew and Luke. And then, of course, Matthew and Luke each have some of their own things that are not found in the other Gospels. So the idea is that Matthew took Mark and Q and his own narrative, and he put it together to make his Gospel. And Luke took Mark and Q and his own narrative and put it together to make his Gospel. And this is the most dominant theory among Bible scholars today, that Mark came first, that a hypothetical document named Q out there existed, and there's some pushback, of course, and there's other ideas and other hypotheses, and that's what we have is hypotheses. But this one plays out pretty well. So maybe, just maybe, there's a Q out there somewhere. So I think that's it for today's AfterWords. I'm excited about next week's AfterWords. We're going to cover a lot of stuff that didn't make it into the sermon that's coming up on Sunday. So I'm excited to talk about faith and the only place that Jesus does not impose his authority. Those are the things we're going to talk about next week. We'll see you Sunday, or we'll see you next week. Have a great week. I hope you enjoy the snow. See ya. Bye.